Welcome to Day 3 of Career Bootcamp 2023. This afternoon session is titled Leadership Styles That Build Success. Please note that this session will be offered in English and French simultaneously. To view the French session, please return to the agenda and click on the link for the French session. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am located is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish-with-a-Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to the Haldimand Treaty Territory. Career Bootcamp is the largest conference in the GC, and the only goal is to support you in your career journey. As we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice. You can vote for questions you like by clicking on the thumbs up button. As with all Fin sessions, this session will be recorded, so you can go back to check out the recordings and the insights at a later date. And on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Jose to get us started today.
Awesome. Thank you, Haley. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have y'all here. As y'all know, this session is Leadership Styles That Build Success. Can we go to the next slide, please? Covering some learning objectives to start. Coming out of the session, we want you to identify the leadership style that's going to allow you to thrive in any role. And we're going to dive into that a little bit, so I'm not going to give too much away. And we also want you to leave with some resources on how you can approach potential managers and also lead open discussions about complementary work styles, discussions that by virtue of themselves are difficult. And lastly, most important, we hope you can take something away so you can learn how to identify your own leadership style. And with that, let me introduce myself. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Jimenez. I'm a technical marketer with the Canadian Digital Service. My journey with the government has led me down many different paths, from working in product QA testing at the Ontario Cabinet Office to supporting the rollout of communications for the COVID Alert app at the Canadian Digital Service. Outside of work, I am a national ambassador with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada. As a learner interested in mentorship, I make it a point to approach the world with curiosity and using that curiosity to help others nurture their own. And really, in that journey, I've been led by different kinds of leaders, each leading a different iteration of myself, and each teaching me a new way to lead. And while the specifics of the journey are particular to me, the idea that different kinds of leaders are needed to help us grow at different stages of our career is not. This conversation is an invitation to evolve the way we think about leadership. Next slide, please. Ooh. There we go. Traditional leadership models are based on hierarchy and rigid power structures. Traits that have been historically associated with masculinity, like confidence, assertiveness, and decisiveness, are heavily prioritized over traits like vulnerability, collaboration, and compromise. That model of leadership excludes diverse groups of people, both from becoming leaders and from receiving the kind of leadership that they need to thrive. And while there's a lot of literature out there on leadership styles, the fact is that the best leadership style is the one that's true to you. Today's speakers, Meredith, Lucy, and Andy, come from an intersection of backgrounds. Our conversation will touch on how they discovered their leadership style and how they achieved that understanding while navigating institutions with leaders they did not see themselves reflected in. I'd now like to give them each a chance to introduce themselves and share a little bit about why this topic is important to them. We're going to start off with Meredith.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on what part of the country you might be in. As this very large slide says, my name is Meredith Richmond. My pronouns are she and her. For those of you who may not be able to see me, I am a woman with white skin. I have mid-length silvery gray hair with maybe a touch of purple in there. And I'm wearing a long sleeve black shirt. I'm so grateful to come here today because in my roles in the government, which is very new, I've only been here for just under 7 years. I've had the opportunity to build my leadership styles. Currently, I'm the Ontario regional lead for the national managers community, but substantively, I'm a veteran service team manager at Veterans Affairs Canada. And I had a whole career before I came to the federal government. I worked as clinical case manager and a registered psychotherapist for about 15 years and completely burned out. What I've learned through the work that I've done and why I always seem to be a helper, and what I particularly enjoy about the work that I get to do here at the government is deriving connections with people, and whether it is my staff or my colleagues or even my bosses, being able to connect with people and support them to be the best versions of themselves, to show up authentically, sparks joy, makes me very happy, and makes me feel like I'm doing something good with my time. So I'm very interested in leadership styles and workplace wellness. And so that's why I'm thrilled to be talking here today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Meredith, for such a beautiful and thoughtful introduction. And your point on burnout is so real. And I think a big part of understanding what influences burnout or what can lead us to burnout can sometimes be an incompatible leadership style. But that's for later in the session. I'm now excited to pass it off to Lucy Ellis to introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody. I am super jazzed to be here with you today. So I started my career as an FSWEP student at the Department of National Defense. I had 7.5 years there, culminating in being the speechwriter for the Chief of the Defense Staff. Then a year in strategic communications at agriculture, and now at natural resources as a speechwriter. And so many of my important career milestones, so much of the joy that I derive from my work, so much of the positive experiences that I've had have come from my relationships with my managers. And I hit the jackpot in my early career. I got phenomenal managers who were not only great people, they were also great managers for me. And from there, I was able to really understand under what conditions do I thrive? Under what conditions am I able to really bring myself to work, be my best self, and do great work? So super jazzed to share those experiences with you, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Lucy. Again, another wonderful introduction. And to your point about finding people that really click with that intrinsic part of ourselves is such an important, I think, to at least reflect on my experiences. It's an important part of starting that growth journey and going from inertia to momentum. And again, we're going to get into all of that later. Last, but certainly not the least, I'm so happy to introduce you to Andy. Andy, take it away.
Hello, bonjour à tous. I'm Andy Pittman. I'm calling from unceded traditional Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. As you can see in my little bio here right now, I'm at the Treasury Board Secretariat within the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, where I've been working on modernizing self-identification for the last couple of years now. And before that, I was at Transport Canada. So I've only been in government 4 years. So I'm kind of in the same, like the federal youth network applies to me too. So I'm definitely learning, and I'm looking forward to learn from my fellow panelists on this conversation. And I'll share more about who I am and my background throughout the other questions. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks, Jose.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, we're being smart. We can't give it all away in the beginning. Got to keep y'all here till the end. And because none of you can unmute yourselves, I'm going to give a hand to our presenters. And honestly, thank you, Andy, for joining me. And also, it's a privilege. It's a privilege for me to host you today. we've been doing a lot of work to prepare for this, and just getting to hear each of your journeys has been such an inspiration for me. And I think for everyone that's in the audience, I'm excited for all that you're going to take away. But before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. We have 2 questions we'd like to answer. First one, these are different questions, but that is okay. No time like the present. First one, I work best when, and you have 4 options. First one is I am given specific expectations and deliverables. Second, I am given a rough idea of what is needed. Third, I am able to work completely autonomously. Fourth, I have never thought of it before. Take a moment to think of your answer while I also read out the second question. Question 2, for me, the quality I look for the most in a leader is kind and empathetic, strong and result-focused. Third, people-centric and engaging. And lastly, competent and knowledgeable. So get your answers in. I'm intrigued to see what people will say. I know from my experiences, I've needed different kinds of leaders through different parts of my life. And, reflecting on a moment, particular moments of great ambiguity, I benefit from someone who can provide that clarity and direction. But then you reach a point where you are delivering. And when you're delivering, at least in my case, I benefit from someone who just gives me their trust and just lets me run off. I'm curious to see what our panelists will have to say once we get into the questions, but we have some answers. Okay, looks like most people, like myself, work best under giving specific expectations and deliverables. Next is I am given a rough idea of what is needed. Third, I am able to work completely autonomously. Last, I have never thought of it before. I love this mix because I think part of it also speaks to you need different styles for different situations, and situations are, context is everything. Situations are always going to be different. Would any of the panelists like to weigh in on the results we have for the first question? Anything you'd like to add? Anything that surprises you?
I love that I've lost it because it's not in front of me now, but the 3 competency, like they're like 33%, and then strong and results driven is like this teeny little bit, which is curious to me. So and makes my little heart warm. Not that results oriented is not important, but I think you have to be all those other things to get results. So I like to see that.
Yeah, definitely. And interesting that, we enjoy having specific expectations. We like clarity, but the leadership style isn't necessarily just focused on only delivering on those expectations. There's all those other components.
So valid. And I didn't even get a chance to get into the second question, but now that you pointed out, Meredith, very interesting that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 breakdown. And almost the interaction between how a lot of people like having specific deliverables, but not everyone wants a leader who's strong and results focused. And I find that sometimes those two go very much hand in hand. I see kind and empathetic. I love a kind and empathetic leader. I'm lucky my current manager uses that style, and it's such a blessing. People-centric and engaging. Again, I think similar to the first question, depending on the context, you're employing different kinds of styles. And reflecting on my own managers, they've all had, or almost capitalized through capitalism, but they've all taken advantage of, they've all brought out these qualities at different times depending on what's needed. Anything else our lovely panelists would like to add before I move on to the next section? To the next section. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for your candid answers. And while we switch over to today's questions, I want to invite you to connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn at the links that have been shared in the group chat. If they have not been shared already, though I'm pretty sure they have, I'm going to ask the Fin folks to kindly share them with our audience. And honestly, if you have any points in the question, if you have questions at any point in the session, post them in the QA function. And you can also upvote your favorite questions, making the task of choosing them much easier for me. And if there's anything that we say that particularly sparks interest in you, connect with us outside of this, either via Twitter, or LinkedIn. We'd be happy to hear from you. I said earlier that the best leadership style is the one that is true to you. And I want to begin by centering this conversation on how you begin this journey. Understanding yourself, your own work, and how you like to be led is the first step to finding managers who can better support you. And this has rung true from my experience and from the experiences of other people I've had the privilege of talking to. So starting with you, Meredith, how did you come to learn how you like to be led?
Probably like most people or a lot of people, by being led in a way that was really unhealthy for me. So learning how I didn't like to be led often helped me understand how I wanted to be led. I mentioned that I'd experienced some burnout in my career. And Jose, you had highlighted that a lot of times folks experience burnout, not just because of workload pressures, but also because of workplaces that don't help you to feel like you belong. I am someone with a fairly significant mental health disability. I'm also a queer person. And I grew up in a time, because I'm significantly older than the rest of the panelists. I grew up in a time when I had to hide a lot of that, where stigma was different. There's certainly a ton of stigma still today. Experiencing queerness as a young person in the 80s was an interesting time. And I often felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And when I entered into a workspace as a professional person, that feeling of not belonging continued. And what I realized is that constantly sort of trying to hide who I am, constantly being afraid of being found out, that somebody was going to sort of recognize that I had this mental health disability, and in workplaces, barriers were constantly being put up to my success. And I spent so much energy trying to be something that I wasn't, or hide what was happening, because nobody was taking the time to actually get to know me, and nobody, there wasn't this safe and accepting kind of workspace. All my energy went into that, and I couldn't really focus on work. As I've aged, as I've had more experiences, more therapy for, my mental health stuff, I got a better understanding of who I was. And one of the things that I always talk about with my staff is, in order to understand what you need and how you lead, often comes from understanding your values. And I really spent a lot of time just understanding what I valued as a person. And I've shared some resources that I think will be on the Fin Wiki around understanding values. Starting from that place helped me understand, I value helping people. I value seeing people succeed, and I value celebrating successes, which means I wanted that for myself. I wanted people that were going to celebrate my successes, that were going to want to know who I was, that what made me tick, beyond just what deliverable could I give them. So I look for leaders that are willing to be a little more open, that are willing to spend some time understanding, relationship making. And I made the joke about, results-driven leaders. If I'm with someone that is only focused on the strategic agenda and the deliverables that come from that, and they're not interested in just spending some time getting to know me and allowing themselves to be known in a certain way, I'm not going to thrive. I'm not going to succeed. I'm not going to feel valued. And And so really it grew out of this place of recognizing I'm not okay in a space where I can't be authentically who I am. And all my terrible experiences, and I'm going to watch for your jazz hands, Jose, when I need to stop, but all these terrible experiences I had were all prior to coming to the government. And it was actually coming to the federal government and joining Veterans Affairs Canada and meeting my first director and my first manager that I ever felt seen and felt heard and felt valued for what it was I brought to the table beyond just my skills as a case manager and as an up and coming leader. They asked questions about what my experiences were with mental health in the workplace and asked what they could do to eliminate some barriers that were in the way of my success. They provided accommodations quite easily and rapidly to eliminate those barriers and allow me, to succeed and to do my work, which just then let my work shine and let my skills shine and not all that other stuff that was part of what I was and who I was, but not necessarily what I always wanted to highlight. And they made space. So from that, that's how I learned. I really like the little jazz hands.
Thank you. Thank you for such a powerful share, Meredith. For context to everyone else, we decided that instead of me interrupting people when their time was up, we're going to do jazz hands. So that is what this is. So if you're asking questions, they're now answered. But to your point, Meredith, it's reflecting on what you said, there is a certain power in that in that journey of learning that came from walking, not like walking, but going through a tough time. And at least, my hope and the hope of other people I've spoken with is to help others not have to go through that, to create conditions, to create resources, learning opportunities, so that others can get to that point of understanding and clarity on what works for them much earlier. And I think in older paradigms, people often say like, oh, if I had to go through, through the challenge or through that difficult moment, then everyone else has to. And personally, I'm of the opinion that we can make, it's our responsibility to make the path better, easier, safe for those that come after us. And just hearing you, Meredith, I feel like you're doing that work. And I'm just so grateful to hear someone in your position, someone who has gone through that journey, not only have so much hope, but also act as a catalyst for change, and now as a catalyst for change within the public service. With that, I would love to hear now from Lucy. Lucy, actually, I'm wrong. I wanted to hear from Andy. Andy, how did you learn how you like to be led?
Oh, thank you. Although order really does not matter to me, but I think you'll find a lot of the same themes in my answer as Meredith's. I first learned how I like to be led. First, I had to break my preconceived notions of what good and bad leadership was. So like Jose, described in his intro remarks, we kind of have sometimes these ideas of leadership, and mine had a slightly different flavor to it. Before I was in the public service, I was in the private sector doing human-centered design, in the social entrepreneurship, social innovation space. So I had this picture of a leader that was very participatory and entrepreneurial, but even embedded with that was still some of those kind of more masculine traits, those kind of strength, vibes. And for me, how that manifested in me that all kind of tie through this thread is about challenging directly. If when we get to the resources, my resource to contribute is Radical Candor, a book, and they use the term challenging directly. And so when I joined government, I joined through the Code for Canada Fellowship, which was all about changing the culture around digital government. And so you can imagine culture change is going to be, you're going to face resistance. But in those early experiences, I didn't see a lot of the leadership that I had in my head as that kind of stereotypical, push forward, the energy, the strength. Our colleagues described it to us as, management and government is like the clay layer. If you could imagine clay, things hard to kind of get through it. And I experienced a little bit of that at first. And so I really struggled to adapt. I struggled to get the change that I wanted to see done. I had project failures, and that failure and that inability to adapt to the culture here in Ottawa would lead me to a pretty serious and public mental breakdown that I tweeted about, which is probably why I'm not on the social media panels. But in that moment, my entire leadership chain stepped in to intervene. So my manager, my director, my DG, and my ADM, within an hour of that tweet, had intervened. And then following that, managing my workload as I sought help and worked to heal myself. And I started to see the value of what I thought was kind of that like clay, more traditional style. That was the thing that saved me in a crisis and kept the ship afloat. And I started to recognize that if I were to be successful, I would need to start to be more adaptable. So in my next role, thankfully, I had a leader who very much demonstrated servant leadership. So their job was to enable me and my work and to develop my career. And the biggest thing that I struggled with that they picked up on was, again, that challenging directly. I would challenge directly no matter what the situation was, and every single situation that occurred, that saying like pick your battles or choose what hills to die on or whatever. It was all of them for me. No discernment. I am happy to die on all the hills. But that did not get the things done, right? So I got that coaching to help me be more fluid, to go between when I would need to challenge directly and when I needed to be a bit more patient and tolerant and sit one out and be more cooperative and take people along with me. So again, to reinforce that point, I learned that it was so important for me at that time in my career to have a leader that would be enabling and empowering and help me believe in myself again and coach me through that hard lesson. But that even that lesson was about being adaptable in my approach to leadership and how I worked. And especially as someone who's pushing for change in different spaces, digital and diversity and inclusion, especially. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Jose.
Thanks, Andy. Didn't even need to use my jazz hands. You made a point about choosing every hill to die on and finding that balance between, or that ability to discern between what fights are worth fighting. I think there's an early layer to that about finding psychological safety for yourself and, setting yourself up to succeed for the battles that are important, for the battles that you need to keep your energy for. And I think a big part of leadership and leadership styles is understanding where it is that your strengths lie and where it is that you might need some help, and how can you, one, either get the resources you need to, or the person or the community or whatever, to set yourself up to succeed in that journey, in that battle. Because we can go through the fire, doesn't mean we need to come out with a 3rd-degree burn. We can put a little suit of armor on. But enough from me. Now, I am so excited to pass it off to Lucy. Lucy, I always did want to hear from you. I just got the order mixed up. So hope no hard feelings.
Yeah. All the love. So I've learned a little bit of something about myself in every job that I've had. So my first sort of like adult, like, post like working at Tim Hortons in a daycare and an organic vegetable garden job, was at the RBC Mortgage Processing Center for a summer. And they had a quota system where you got a number of points for every transaction that you processed, which you would think would be really stressful. But I found something so immeasurably satisfying about like seeing my little quota bar stack up and seeing my tangible objectives and output and being able to be like, yes, I nailed it. I crushed it that day. So that was where I learned that I love numbers, I love stats, and I love clear objectives. I love knowing objectively that I'm doing a good job. At the Canadian Joint Operations Command, I was given a ton of leeway and flexibility to be creative. I was the office millennial. I was handed the keys to the Twitter account. It was a glorious couple of years of my life. And a lot of trust was placed in me, and I realized how much I valued being seen as an expert and being trusted to be an expert in my field of technical expertise. And then when I became speechwriter for the Chief of the Defense Staff, my manager and I would have these like just extraordinary deep conversations about all of the issues that were going on. And she really challenged me to, to refine my critical thinking, but she placed a lot of trust in me and in my judgment. So it wasn't so much those technical skills, it was honing in on my judgment. And she backed me up in my decision making. And that was a sort of a realization of how much it meant to me that I had a manager that would say, you can go off, you can make that decision and I'll back you. Even if it's not necessarily the decision that I would have made, I trust you, I trust your judgment, and I will have your back. And that meant the world to me. She also said about the Radical Candor podcast. So I started listening to that because of her, and would echo Andy's suggestion there. And I love what Meredith said about also finding leaders who allow themselves to be known by you. Like we had such strong personal relationships. And then at agriculture, I learned when I needed to ask for help. I got in there, and even though I had had all of these years of communications experience, I had never worked in a strategic communications role before. So I got in and other people assumed that I knew what I was doing. And I had massive imposter syndrome. And I kind of floundered for the first month or so, in my head. And I was doing a good job, but in my head, I was like, I'm terrible, I'm bad. They're going to know that I'm a fraud. They're going to regret that they hired me. Everything is terrible. Until I finally just had a conversation with my manager about how I was feeling. And I asked for a little bit more structure, a little bit more guidance, and some firmer deadlines. And she was like, oh, yeah, of course. And then gave me those things that I needed. So that was where I learned that if I needed things, I needed to ask for them. And it is Radical Candor is the podcast and the book. So yeah, that's it's my sort of my journey of self-discovery.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you all of you for these vulnerable, candid, powerful shares. I think for the people that are listening, really what we're hoping you take away from this is there is no one answer. There's only, I guess, the end or destination. That is just understanding yourself better. And that can look like any number of different journeys, different processes, different reflections in self-help books. But understanding yourself first makes it easier to understand the leadership style that will most empower you. And I know, for myself, I'm someone that does like space for emotion, does like space for vulnerability. And candidly, even though classic professionalism paradigms say you shouldn't need this. I appreciate affirmation. I appreciate people telling me you are, awesome work. Thank you for being here. This is great. And often say, it doesn't cost you anything to say that to someone else. But I think, we're socialists to think that, oh, don't be needy. And of course you can go, balance in all things. You're not gonna be asking, oh, am I doing this right? Every time you write one more word, every time you got to make one change to the briefing note. But there is a balance. There is a balance to both confidence in the self, but also like psychological safety and support from those you're working with. And you will probably, for the folks listening, you'll probably notice now that we'll come from different backgrounds and really will exist at different intersectionalities. From my experience, the best leaders create spaces for people to come as they are. Whether we are at our jobs 8 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, for who knows how long. You might as well make your workplace a space where people can truly be themselves, instead of having to put on a mask and use that energy to put up a facade. And instead, they can channel energy into their work. So, starting with Andy this time. Andy, can you speak to your own intersectional identities and how they influence how you like to lead?
Well, first, I'd just like to affirm you, Jose, that you're doing such a great job summarizing and reflecting what we're saying here and keeping this panel extra juicy and adding so much value. So thank you. So like I kind of said before, I alluded to before, something that's, my default leadership style would still be pretty participatory, because I know how much wisdom and value comes from lived experience. And I feel like I've seen kind of two sides of the life coin, where I had to grow up through a bunch of adversity, but I've still been successful. And a lot of that has to do with my white privilege. And some of that has to do with building my career with my hands. So if you'll indulge me, I'll illustrate a little bit. I grew up very poor and sick. When I was 5, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. I didn't go to university. I'm unilingual, working on it. When it comes to getting into government, these are things that, if I went in through the front door, I would never get in. And later in life, I would discover that I am, not straight, not a cisgendered woman. Very glad to be discovering that today, though, and not 20 years ago or whatever you said, Meredith. But I've seen, I've experienced those systems of oppression, and I've seen how I kind of got through them with that white privilege, and have still managed. I'm on this panel, right? I'm the lead human-centered designer at TBS, in a diversity and inclusion organization. Sorry. So the proof, I think, also is in the fact that I'm a design practitioner, and the whole point of design is to take the lived experience of people and use that wisdom to solve solutions and build solutions with them. So I can't stress enough how critical it is to recognize your own lived experience as valuable, as meritorious, that these are the things that can guide and inform your leadership style. And especially when you're someone who has identities that are discriminated against, that have biases. We have, even in the public service, systems of discrimination, of racism. So, as much as this panel can speak to a success story for us, there's still many barriers to unblock. So it takes, I think, that bravery to be your authentic self. And for when you can, I also want to recognize that there are times when you cannot. for your own safety, for your own job security, and just want to recognize that pain there. But for when you can, and for when you maybe get a bit further in your career and you become a leader yourself, I hope that you see the value in all of those things that maybe are traditionally discriminated against, and that you can use that as your superpower. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you, Andy. And again, just such a powerful share. I have no words. I think I need a moment to reflect on that. And while I reflect on that, I would love to pass it off to Lucy. Lucy, can you speak to your intersectional identities and how they influence how you like to lead?
Thank you. And thank you, Andy. That was such a thoughtful and wonderful response. So when I started in government, so my first job as a student was at the Canadian Joint Operations Command. So to set the scene, military headquarters that runs all of the operations in Canada and overseas. And it's mostly like mid to senior career officers, a lot of Army, mostly men. The building was like 80% military. And I roll in, 20 years old, like femme, bisexual, bubbly, and wore bright colors and dresses, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. And for a while, I felt very self-conscious of that, that I so clearly was different to the majority of the people just around me and in the building. But I had a really great team and really great leaders who really just encouraged me to be myself and to open up. And I realized that I had been really guarded in my first sort of couple of months there. And once I started to open up, because I realized that I could, and because I had leaders who were encouraging me to, with my like dumb mannerisms and my millennialisms, that was when I really shone through and my strengths shone through. And when I was able to do the best work that I could. I am also very squishy. I have cried with every single manager who I have had. Like when my great aunt died, when my mom and stepdad have been having health problems, when I had panic attacks because I lived downtown during the convoy occupation, when, like the list goes on and on, like I weep, I cry. And having managers who were receptive to that and who didn't judge me for that, because I could cry and then go do some good therapy and have a good chat and then come back to work and I would be okay. Just having space for that, to just be myself and not be judged for that, has been so important.
Thank you, Lucy. And being conscious of time, I am going to move on to our last question. And this question, I'm going to start off with Meredith. But before I pass it off to you, Meredith, let me share the last question. The common thread in our conversation today has been communication. As managers and as people with managers above them, let's hear first from Meredith. How do you look for and ask for what you need out of a leader? How do you communicate that?
Well, I kind of alluded to it a little bit sort of in the beginning. I center a lot of my work around values and values-based understanding and empathetic interactions. And I suspect that comes from my training as a therapist. And it comes from my lived experience as somebody who has been very ill with mental health for my whole life. And what I came to learn about myself was that if I'm not in an environment like I've talked about that allows me to be that person, then my mental health symptoms will get very triggered. And part of that is around PTSD, and it becomes a very unsafe place for me. And I've had to leave workplaces because of that. So, I've learned that I have to be able to create my own safety. And part of that is how what can I say and what can I say? And I don't know that there's necessarily a super quick and easy answer to that, because there's a lot of things that play into that. And Andy really hit the nail on the head. I too am extremely privileged with my white skin, and to manage life with the level of mental health disability that I've had, at points in time, not even sure that I could maintain being here anymore. To be able to navigate that and find my way into a space where I raised a child on my own. I put myself through school on my own. I have this incredibly successful career in the government. If my skin was any other color, that may not be the case. So when we talk about things like vulnerability, and we talk about things around being able to communicate about our needs and being able to ask for what we need, there's inherent privileges associated with being able to do that. Marginalized folks who have different kinds of experience, we tend to become very good at being able to read a room. And we often code switch. Like, we get very good at fitting ourselves in and to create safety. So I just think we have to be mindful of all those things when we talk about this, because it is going to be different for everybody. And this is certainly where coaches and mentors, people where you see yourself in these people, these are people that can really support you. But what I can say from the perspective as somebody who's really struggled with mental health and needing, a safe place to land, is I start by determining the goals for myself. So I start by recognizing, as I talked about in values, what I need, and being able to create my own sort of learning plan. So I know what my objectives are, and then I can gently, as Lucy said she did with her boss, gently sort of start talking about, here's how I succeed better. And you can start planting the seeds. It's a good place to start.
Thank you, Meredith. Again, y'all have led such powerful journeys of resilience and transformation. And as someone who's earlier on their life journey, I'm amazed. It's in awe of, despite the challenge and the hardship, y'all have remained thoughtful, y'all have remained kind, y'all have remained authentic to yourselves in a space that has consistently been telling you that there's something you need to change. And that, to me, like, when I look from, as a person that looks up to leaders, that to me speaks volumes on who is a leader who's authentic to themselves. And with that, I want to pass it off to Lucy to share her thoughts. Lucy, how do you look for and ask for what you need out of a leader?
So I would love to pick up on what Meredith said about reading a room. So I think there's two places where you can sort of suss things out. So first is, like, you need to vibe check in your interview. When you're looking for jobs, remember that it's not just about you proving that you're the best candidate for the job. It's also about you determining whether that job and whether that potential manager is going to be a good fit for you. So I wrote up a couple questions that I've asked in interviews and why I asked them. By no means is this like you should ask 13 questions in your interview, but take a look and think about, what are the things that you value? Like Meredith was saying, like, think about your own values, think about what you need, and what can you ask in an interview to sort of suss out whether or not you're going to get it in that job. The other thing is, so when I left National Defense, I was very emotionally burnt out from writing speeches about sexual assault and harassment every single day. It took a really big toll on me. And I was really honest about that. in my interviews. And I straight up, I explained the situation to them, and then I gauged the reaction of what the hiring manager said. Like, did they respond with empathy? Did they respond with understanding? Or were they a little like taken aback or standoffish? So that sharing a bit of myself to then pick up, like, were they picking up what I was putting down? That was really important to me. I also asked around, I asked trusted people, because in, government communications, small community, everybody knows each other. So ask around and suss out what the person's leadership style is, and if you're going to be a good fit with them. And I have also asked to speak to a member of the team that I would be joining before accepting a position, to also sort of get a little bit more detail on what the actual lay of the land is. Once you're in the job, your manager can't be a mind reader. At a certain point, if you need something, you have to find a way to communicate it. You have to, ask for a regular bilat, or ask for more informal chats, ask for more guidance or more direction, ask if you can backbench on meetings, like ask about tangible things you can improve on. A lot of my career has been luck. A lot of my success has come from privileges that I have held, but a lot of things I've also just asked for and advocated for. I lobbied for like 5 months to be able to go on a military exercise up north, and it was amazing. But you have to, at a certain point, sort of step forward for the things that you really need and really want, and communicate those.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm not sure if we had already shared the resource that you created. I see not. Awesome. Last but not least, I want to pass it off to Andy to close us off on this question.
I'll be super quick because between Meredith and Lucy, I think a lot was covered. I think the only thing I want to add, two little things. I just want to stress that it's a two-way street with your manager. They have to adapt to your style as much as you have to adapt to theirs. And that relationship and that trust is what's going to help you navigate any sort of friction or conflict with your style. I'm sure I see a lot of Q&A about like, what's that line before you decide to leave? So I'm sure we'll get to that. The other thing, as a person with a disability is making sure that the manager that you're about to enter in has knowledge about accommodations, is going to take your accommodations seriously and compassionately. Disability management is not consistent across the federal public service. So I don't have a resource for you yet, but me and some coworkers across the GC are going to be working on something to help some specific guidance around seeking accommodations if you're doing it for the first time. So if you haven't followed me on Twitter yet, do that, and hopefully we'll have something. Yeah, I can't make a commitment to when, but that accommodations piece is also, I think, really important. That's it.
Thank you, Andy. And again, because no one can unmute and clap, I will clap on their behalf, as I'm sure there's roaring applause happening at everyone's homes and offices right now. We have a few minutes left for questions. I think we'll be able to get to one or two of them. Thank you everyone for putting in your questions into the Q&A. The most upvoted question, and the first one, why do we have bad managers? Who trains them to lead people? I see everyone having a little laugh. Who wants to take that up first?
I was a bad manager once upon a time, right? Like I think lots of reasons, but sometimes you have a bad manager because they don't know, or they lack experience, and they need guidance, they need mentorship. They, as much as you do when you're a new staff, when you're a new manager, it is it's a learning process. And so you hope that managers have the insight to recognize that they're still learning, that there's areas where they need to grow. When you have managers, and they do exist across the world and in the government, there are folks that don't have that insight. that don't have a natural inclination, to want to make changes. And, there is some training that managers have to do to become a manager in the federal government. And we're getting better at making sure that also includes issues around diversity and inclusion and disability management, and a better understanding of your own personality and how that impacts. And we're putting a lot more onus around mentoring and coaching. But for folks who maybe started, and I'm old, so I'm not trying to come across as ageist, but if you started this process a while ago, you may not have had access to some of those newer ways of thinking yet.
Thank you, Meredith. And so true, that point of newer ways of thinking. Things evolve, society changes, the context we live in changes. So does the leadership style required to take on the complex problems we face every day. Lucy, Andy, is there anything you want to add to that? Or shall I move on to our next question? Okay. Next question from Christina. Any advice on being a leader when you're an introvert? Who on our panel is an introvert? There we go. Any advice?
I mean, I feel like I'm like a cheating introvert. Maybe there's like an ambivert vibe. I present as an extrovert, but I'm not. I really am not. So my advice is probably super bad advice. Like, make it. No, but really rest. Rest is so important. How you recharge and how you rest and prepare for your day and take care of yourself after. The biggest thing, I mean, I've burnt out. I'm in perpetual permanent burnout, I feel. So I'm always thinking about how I can rest deeper, rest more, while competing against all of the things that are being demanded of me as someone existing in 2023. So just do what you can to take care of yourself. Like, seriously, find out what that is and do it.
Thank you, Andy. And if I may add one tidbit, something I've learned, find someone close to you who you trust, who is whatever that opposite communication style is. So I'm lucky that one of my best friends is an introvert, and they help sort of bring me in, and I help bring them out, and we help each other. So you're, whatever, really, when I say find the resources that you need, community, people, learning, books, whatever, you are not alone, and you don't have to do this on your own. Meredith, Lucy, anything you want to add before I close off the panel?
No, I would just really echo Andy's. I mean, I am quite a significant introvert, and I'm actually quite shy, which nobody believes, but it's actually true. What I do have is the benefit of experience. I've had a long time to learn to become comfortable in my own skin, and with that sort of comes an ability to share myself. But I prioritize my wellness, and working with staff drains me, and so I prioritize what I need to do after to regroup. And I can give you that advice. Introverts can be great leaders. You just have to prioritize the things that you need to regenerate, so you're able to keep leading.
Thank you, Meredith. And again, everyone at home, a big hand for our wonderful panelists. A blessing to have worked on this with you. So much love to all of you, and thank you for the candid, vulnerable, and just powerful shares. I learned a lot, and I will definitely look at this recording the next time I have questions on my own leadership style or inspiration. And to you at home, if you want to know about any more of these topics, check out the Career Bootcamp 2023 wiki resource page. The resource we've mentioned will be posted up there. And before I pass it back to Finn, I just want to say, trust yourself and trust your own way of knowing. There's what we've been taught, but in the end, the leadership style that's going to work the best is the one that's true to you. Back over to you, Haley.
Thank you so much to all of you. That was fantastic. Before we end, we do have one final polling question for you. The results from the poll won't be shared. They're just for our own review purposes. Was this session a good use of your time? Yes, no, or I don't know. There is an opportunity to network with other GOC employees, and that's going to take place from 4 till 5 today on WonderMe. Today's theme are the diversity and inclusion networks. So be sure to join and network and find some communities that maybe you would like to get involved in. We will also have a networking event on Thursday, and I think all of the panelists and Jose will be present. So if you have any questions, make sure you join for that and you can have a chat with them in a more casual environment. Don't forget to join us for the final day of CBC on Thursday, January 26th. As a reminder, the link to all of the sessions as well as the networking event can be found on the VExpo. All of the resources will be available on the wiki page, and the recording to this event will be available on our YouTube channel later this evening. Thank you all and have a great day.